What happens when a simple late-night talk show interview turns into one of the most explosive confrontations ever caught on live television? Tonight, we're diving deep into the shocking moment when Channing Tatum completely lost his composure on Jimmy Fallon's show, and trust me, you've never seen anything like this before. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and what started as innocent banter quickly spiraled into something that left the entire studio audience in stunned silence. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think really caused this epic meltdown, because this one is going to blow your mind. It was supposed to be just another typical Tuesday night episode of The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Channing Tatum had come on to promote his latest film project, and everything seemed perfectly normal as he walked out to thunderous applause from the studio audience. Jimmy greeted him with his usual enthusiasm, that trademark smile plastered across his face as he welcomed the Hollywood heartthrob to his iconic desk. "Channing Tatum, everybody. Welcome back to the show, man. Always great to have you here," Jimmy said, gesturing toward his guest with both hands as the crowd continued their enthusiastic cheering. Channing settled into his chair, flashing that million-dollar smile that had made him famous. "Thanks for having me back, Jimmy. Always a pleasure to be here. So tell me about this new movie you've got coming out. I heard it's pretty intense, a real departure from some of your previous work," Jimmy continued, leaning forward slightly in that animated way he always did when he was genuinely interested in what his guests had to say. "Yeah, it really is. Without giving too much away, it deals with some pretty heavy subject matter. Family trauma, addiction, the whole 9 yards. It was probably the most challenging role I've ever taken on," Channing replied, his expression becoming more serious as he spoke about the project. Jimmy nodded enthusiastically. "That's incredible, man. I love when actors really push themselves like that. But speaking of challenging, I have to ask you about something. There's been some talk online about your preparation method for this role. Some people are saying you went a little too far with the method acting approach." The smile on Channing's face faltered slightly, and there was a subtle shift in his posture. "What do you mean by that exactly, Jimmy?" "Well, I've heard from some sources that you actually put yourself through some pretty intense experiences to really get into character. Some people are questioning whether that was necessary or even healthy," Jimmy said, his tone still light, but with an underlying edge that wasn't there moments before. Channing's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I think you need to be more specific about what you're referring to, because I'm not sure where you're getting your information from." "Come on, man. We're all friends here. There's no judgment. I'm just curious about your process as an artist," Jimmy pressed, that famous laugh of his punctuating his words, but somehow it didn't sound quite as genuine as usual. "My process as an artist isn't really up for debate or public scrutiny, Jimmy. I take my craft seriously, and I do whatever it takes to deliver an authentic performance. If that makes some people uncomfortable, that's their problem, not mine," Channing said, his voice taking on a slightly defensive tone that anyone paying close attention would have noticed. The studio audience was still completely unaware of the growing tension between the two men. To them, this probably just seemed like typical celebrity interview banter. But those who knew what to look for could see the subtle signs that something was beginning to shift in the dynamic between host and guest. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, that perpetual smile still in place. "Hey, I totally respect that. I'm just saying, when you're in the public eye like you are, people are naturally going to be curious about these things. It comes with the territory, you know?" "Does it, though?" Channing asked, his voice becoming noticeably cooler. "Does everything I do have to be dissected and analyzed by people who have no idea what they're talking about? I mean, where exactly are you getting this information from anyway?" There was a brief moment of silence that felt much longer than it actually was. Jimmy's laugh filled the void, but it sounded forced now, almost nervous. "Well, you know how it is in this business. People talk, rumors spread. I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, I'm just curious. Curious about what exactly? About my personal life? About decisions I make as a professional actor? Or are you curious about spreading gossip on your show? Channing's tone was becoming increasingly sharp, though he was still maintaining his composure on the surface. The camera operators were starting to sense something was off. You could see them adjusting their positions slightly, trying to capture the best angles of what was quickly becoming a much more intense conversation than anyone had anticipated. Jimmy held up his hands in a gesture that was meant to be placating. "Whoa, hold on there. I'm not trying to spread any gossip. I'm just having a conversation with you about your work. Isn't that what we're here for?" "Are we, though? Because it seems like you're more interested in whatever rumors you've heard than you are in actually discussing the film I'm here to promote," Channing shot back, his eyes narrowing slightly as he stared directly at his host. The audience was beginning to pick up on the fact that something unusual was happening. The energy in the room had shifted from the typical jovial atmosphere of a late-night talk show to something much more uncomfortable and unpredictable. "Look, Channing, I think maybe we're getting off on the wrong foot here," Jimmy said, his voice taking on a slightly more serious tone as he seemed to realize that his guest was genuinely upset about something. "Maybe we are, but that happens. When you ambush someone with questions about their personal life based on rumors and speculation," Channing replied, his voice steady but with an unmistakable edge to it. Jimmy's famous laugh returned, but it was definitely strained now. "Ambush? Come on, man, that's a pretty strong word. We're just having a conversation." "Are we? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you had an agenda coming into this that has nothing to do with promoting my film or having a genuine conversation about my work," Channing said, leaning forward slightly in his chair. The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. You could see members of the production crew exchanging glances, clearly unsure about how to handle what was rapidly becoming a very uncomfortable situation for everyone involved. "I don't have an agenda, Channing. I'm just trying to do my job here," Jimmy said, his smile finally beginning to fade as the reality of the situation started to sink in. "Your job is to entertain your audience and help your guests promote their projects. So far tonight, you've done neither of those things. What you have done is repeat gossip and try to make me uncomfortable on your show," Channing replied, his voice remaining controlled, but with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. The studio audience was now completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary, though they probably couldn't have predicted just how much more intense things were about to become. Jimmy shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly realizing that his usual charm and humor weren't going to smooth over whatever was happening here. "Okay, look, maybe I could have approached this differently, but you have to understand, when stories start circulating about a major star like yourself, it becomes news. People want to know." "People want to know," Channing repeated, his voice rising slightly for the first time. "Or you want ratings? Because there's a difference, Jimmy, and I think we both know which one this is really about." The accusation hung in the air like a live wire. Jimmy's face flushed slightly, and for the first time since the interview began, his composure cracked just a little. "That's not fair, man. I've always been respectful to you when you've been on this show." "Have you, though? Because right now, it feels like you invited me here under false pretenses so you could ambush me with whatever tabloid nonsense you've been reading," Channing fired back, his hands gripping the arms of his chair tightly enough that his knuckles were starting to turn white. Jimmy's laugh came out as more of a nervous chuckle. "Come on, Channing. You're being a little dramatic here, don't you think? This is how these interviews work. We talk about your projects. We talk about your life. We have some fun with it." "Fun?" Channing's voice carried a level of incredulity that made several people in the front row of the audience visibly uncomfortable. "You think this is fun? You think spreading rumors about my personal choices and questioning my professionalism is entertainment?" The cameras were now capturing every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language between the two men. What had started as a typical celebrity interview had transformed into something much more raw and unpredictable, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Jimmy tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, I think we're both getting a little heated here. Maybe we should take a step back and talk about the movie." "That's why you're here, right?" "Now you want to talk about the movie?" Channing asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "After you've spent the last several minutes questioning my integrity as an actor and basically calling me unstable on national television?" "I never called you unstable," Jimmy protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "You didn't have to say the words, Jimmy. The implication was pretty clear. You questioned my methods, suggested I went too far, implied that my approach was somehow unhealthy or unnecessary. What exactly would you call that?" Channing's voice was becoming more intense with each word, though he was still maintaining a level of control that suggested this was far from over. Jimmy glanced toward his desk, probably hoping for some kind of salvation from his cue cards or maybe a commercial break, but there was no escape from the confrontation that was unfolding in real time. "I think you're misinterpreting what I said." "Am I?" "Because I'm sitting right here, Jimmy. I heard every word that came out of your mouth, and so did everyone else in this studio and everyone watching at home. So please, explain to me how I'm misinterpreting your questions about my mental health and professional judgment." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This was clearly unlike anything they had ever witnessed at a taping of The Tonight Show. Some people were pulling out their phones, though it was unclear whether they were trying to record what was happening or looking for an escape from the increasingly uncomfortable situation. Jimmy's famous smile had completely disappeared now, replaced by a look that was equal parts frustration and genuine concern about where this was heading. "Channing, I think you're taking this way too personally. I ask tough questions sometimes. That's part of what I do." "Tough questions?" Channing leaned forward in his chair, his eyes locked on Jimmy's. "Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like you're trying to create drama for your show by attacking your guests." "I'm not attacking you," Jimmy said, his voice becoming defensive for the first time. "I'm trying to have a conversation with you about your work and your choices as an actor." "My choices as an actor are mine to make, Jimmy. They're not up for debate on your show. They're not up for judgment by you or your audience. And they're certainly not fodder for whatever gossip mill you're apparently plugged into these days," Channing replied, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of anger that was impossible to miss. Jimmy's hands were fidgeting with his note cards now, a clear sign of his growing discomfort. "I think you're being unfair here. I've been nothing but supportive of your career over the years." "Supportive? You call this supportive? Jimmy, you invited me on your show to promote my film, and instead you've spent the entire time trying to embarrass me and question my professionalism. If this is your idea of support, I'd hate to see what it looks like when you actually have a problem with someone." The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Production assistants were whispering urgently to each other off camera, clearly trying to figure out how to handle a situation that had spiraled completely out of their control. The band members were exchanging nervous glances, and even the usually stone-faced security personnel seemed on edge. Jimmy tried one more time to defuse the situation. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot tonight. Why don't we start over? Tell me about the new movie, and let's forget about everything else." Channing stared at him for a long moment, and you could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he decided how to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter but somehow more intense than it had been all night. "You want to start over? After you've already shown your audience and everyone watching at home exactly who you really are and what you really think of me? After you've made it clear that you're more interested in tabloid drama than actual journalism? You think we can just pretend that didn't happen?" Jimmy's face was flushed now, and his usual composure had completely abandoned him. "I think you're being incredibly unfair right now, and honestly, I'm starting to wonder if maybe there was some truth to those stories I heard." The words hit the studio like a thunderclap. Several people in the audience audibly gasped, and you could see the exact moment when Channing's last thread of patience finally snapped. His face went completely still, and when he spoke again, his voice was so quiet that everyone in the studio had to strain to hear him. "What did you just say to me?" Jimmy seemed to realize immediately that he had crossed a line, but it was too late to take it back. "I didn't mean... I was just saying that maybe." "No," Channing cut him off, his voice sharp as a blade. "You said exactly what you meant to say. You just confirmed that this entire interview was a setup. You came in here with your mind already made up about me, and you've been trying to get me to lose my temper so you could prove whatever point you thought you were making." The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. This was no longer just an uncomfortable interview. This was something much more serious, and everyone present could feel the weight of what was happening. Jimmy's voice was barely above a whisper when he finally responded. "Channing, I think maybe we should take a break." "A break?" Channing's voice was filled with disbelief. "You think after what you just said, after you basically admitted that you set me up, that we're going to take a little break and come back and pretend everything is fine? That we're going to laugh it off and move on to some stupid game or sketch?" The confrontation had reached a fever pitch, and it was clear that there was no going back from this point. Whatever happened next was going to be unprecedented in the history of late-night television, and everyone in that studio knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. Channing stood up from his chair, and the sudden movement sent a ripple of tension through the entire studio. His eyes never left Jimmy's face as he slowly shook his head, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a level of controlled fury that was absolutely chilling. "You know what, Jimmy? I've been in this business for a long time, and I've dealt with a lot of different kinds of people. I've worked with directors who were difficult, producers who were demanding, and co-stars who were unprofessional. But I have never, and I mean never, had someone invite me into their house, look me in the eye, and deliberately try to humiliate me on television." Jimmy remained seated, but you could see the color draining from his face as he realized the full magnitude of what he had done. "Channing, please, just sit down and let's talk about this like adults." "Talk about this like adults?" Channing's laugh was bitter and completely devoid of humor. "Adults don't ambush their guests with tabloid gossip. Adults don't set up their interviews to make people look bad. Adults don't admit on live television that they were trying to prove some ridiculous point about someone they barely know." The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming one of the most dramatic confrontations in late-night television history. You could see production crew members frantically trying to figure out what to do, but nobody seemed willing to step in and stop what was happening. Jimmy tried to stand up as well, perhaps thinking that would help level the playing field, but Channing held up his hand in a gesture that made it clear he should stay exactly where he was. "Don't," Channing said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare try to make this about equal footing now. You had your chance to be respectful. You had your chance to be professional, and you blew it. You made your choice when you decided to turn this interview into some kind of hit piece." "It wasn't a hit piece," Jimmy protested weakly. "I was just asking questions that people want answers to." "People want answers to?" Channing repeated, his voice rising again. "What people, Jimmy? What people are so desperate to know about my personal life and my professional choices that you felt justified in ambushing me on your show? Or are you talking about your producers? Your network executives? The people who told you that creating drama would be good for ratings?" Jimmy's silence was more telling than any answer he could have given. His usual quick wit and ability to deflect uncomfortable situations had completely abandoned him, leaving him sitting there looking like a deer caught in headlights. "That's what I thought," Channing continued, his voice filled with disgust. "This was never about journalism. This was never about having a real conversation, and it was certainly never about promoting my film. This was about you trying to create a viral moment at my expense." The audience was completely transfixed by what they were witnessing. Many of them had their phones out now, clearly recording what was happening, despite whatever rules the show might have about that sort of thing. This was the kind of moment that people would be talking about for years to come. Channing began pacing slowly in the small space in front of Jimmy's desk, his hands clenched at his sides. "You want to know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? I actually respected you. I thought you were one of the good ones in this business. I thought you cared about your guests and wanted to help them succeed. But tonight you've shown me exactly who you really are." Jimmy finally found his voice again, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I do care about my guests. I've always been respectful." "Respectful?" Channing stopped pacing and turned to face him directly. "You call what happened here tonight respectful? You call questioning my mental health on national television respectful? You call spreading rumors about my personal life respectful? Because if that's your definition of respect, Jimmy, then I think you need to look that word up in the dictionary." The band members, who were usually a source of energy and levity during difficult moments on the show, were sitting in complete silence. Even they seemed to understand that this had gone far beyond anything that could be fixed with a musical interlude or a well-timed joke. Jimmy made one more desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Channing, I think we're both saying things we don't mean right now. Maybe we should just take that break I mentioned and come back when we've both had a chance to cool down." Channing's response was immediate and definitive. "There is no coming back from this, Jimmy. There is no cooling down period that's going to make this okay. You crossed a line tonight that can't be uncrossed, and frankly, I don't think you even understand what you did wrong." "Then tell me," Jimmy said, his voice taking on a note of genuine desperation. "Tell me what I did wrong so I can fix it." Channing stared at him for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a kind of sad disappointment that was somehow worse than his earlier anger. "The fact that you have to ask me that question tells me everything I need to know about you, Jimmy. The fact that you can sit there after everything that's happened tonight and still not understand what you did wrong means that you're exactly the kind of person I thought you weren't." Jimmy's hands were shaking slightly now as he gripped the edge of his desk. "I was just doing my job." "No," Channing said firmly. "You were not doing your job. Your job is to entertain people and help your guests promote their projects. What you did tonight was use your platform to spread gossip and try to embarrass someone who trusted you enough to come on your show. That's not journalism. That's not entertainment. That's just mean-spirited tabloid nonsense." The tension in the studio had reached a level that felt almost unbearable. Production assistants were having hushed conversations with what appeared to be network executives, clearly trying to figure out how to handle a situation that had completely spiraled out of control. Channing looked around the studio, taking in the faces of the audience members, the crew, and the band. When his gaze finally returned to Jimmy, his expression had shifted from anger to something that looked almost like pity. "You know what the saddest part about all of this is, Jimmy? You had a chance tonight to have a real conversation with me about my work, about this film that I'm genuinely proud of, about the challenges and rewards of taking on difficult roles. Instead, you chose to focus on rumors and speculation because you thought it would make better television." Jimmy's voice was barely audible when he responded. "The network has certain expectations." "The network has certain expectations," Channing repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "So you sold out your integrity, you sold out your guest, and you sold out your audience because the network has certain expectations. Do you hear yourself right now, Jimmy? Do you understand what you just admitted to?" The studio audience was witnessing something unprecedented, a complete breakdown of the usual facade that governed late-night television. This was real, unscripted, and absolutely riveting in the most uncomfortable way possible. Channing shook, his head slowly, his expression a mixture of disgust and disappointment. "I came here tonight to talk about my work, to connect with your audience, and to hopefully entertain some people. Instead, I got ambushed by someone I thought was a friend, someone I trusted, someone I believed was better than this." The weight of his words seemed to hit Jimmy like a physical blow, and you could see him visibly deflate in his chair. Whatever bravado or justification he might have been clinging to was completely gone now, replaced by the dawning realization of just how badly he had mishandled the entire situation. "I trusted you, Jimmy," Channing continued, his voice breaking slightly for the first time all night. "And you used that trust to try to make me look bad on television. I don't know if I can ever forgive that." The silence that followed was deafening. Jimmy sat frozen in his chair, staring at his hands, while Channing stood there letting the full weight of his words sink in. The studio audience was completely motionless, as if they were afraid that even breathing too loudly might somehow make this situation even worse than it already was. When Jimmy finally looked up, his eyes were glassy and his voice cracked when he spoke. "Channing, I never meant for it to go this far. I genuinely thought we were just having a conversation." "A conversation?" Channing's voice was quieter now, but the hurt in it was unmistakable. "Jimmy, conversations don't involve one person setting up the other person to fail. Conversations don't involve ambushing someone with rumors and then admitting you were trying to prove a point about their character. What happened here tonight wasn't a conversation. It was a public execution." Jimmy ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling with how to respond. "I know how this looks, but I swear to you I didn't plan for it to happen like this." "Maybe you didn't plan for me to call you out on it," Channing replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Maybe you thought I would just sit there and take it. Maybe you thought I would laugh it off or get defensive in a way that would make me look bad. But the fact that you're surprised by my reaction tells me that you never really considered how your questions would affect me as a human being." The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of this unprecedented breakdown. You could see production assistants frantically trying to communicate with someone off camera, probably network executives who were trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial or let this extraordinary moment play out. Channing moved back toward his chair but didn't sit down. Instead, he placed his hands on the back of it and leaned forward slightly, looking directly at Jimmy. "Do you know what it's like to put yourself through hell for a role? To push yourself to places mentally and emotionally that most people never have to go? To sacrifice your comfort, your peace of mind, sometimes even your relationships, all in service of creating something meaningful for people?" Jimmy shook his head slightly, his usual confidence completely shattered. "Of course you don't," Channing continued, "because your job is to sit behind this desk and make jokes and play games and interview people who do the real work. And that's fine, Jimmy. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't you dare sit there and judge the choices that real artists make when you've never had to put yourself on the line the way we do." The brutality of the statement hung in the air like smoke. Jimmy's face went through a range of emotions, from shock to hurt, to something that might have been anger, but he seemed unable to find the words to respond. "You want to know about my process?" Channing asked, his voice becoming more intense. Again. "You want to know what I did to prepare for this role? I spent months researching addiction, talking to people in recovery, visiting treatment centers, and yes, putting myself through some difficult experiences to understand what my character was going through, not because I'm unstable, not because I went too far, but because I cared enough about the story and the people it represents to do the work properly." Jimmy finally found his voice, though it was barely above a whisper. "I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Channing shot back. "You didn't want to know about the research or the preparation or the collaboration with addiction specialists. You wanted drama. You wanted controversy. You wanted something that would get people talking on social media. Well, congratulations, Jimmy. You got exactly what you wanted." The studio audience was completely captivated by what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a celebrity having a meltdown. This was a master class in how to stand up for yourself, with dignity and intelligence, while still expressing genuine emotion and hurt. Channing straightened up and looked around the studio once more, taking in the faces of everyone present. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable note of finality. I came here tonight to talk about a film that means something to me, that deals with important issues, that might actually help some people who are struggling with similar problems. Instead, I got ambushed by someone I thought was a friend, someone who decided that creating fake drama was more important than having a real conversation about real issues. Jimmy made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. The film sounds incredible, and I know our audience would love to hear about it. Can we please just start over and talk about that? Channing looked at him for a long moment, and you could see him considering the offer. But when he shook his head, everyone in the studio knew that this interview was truly over. No, Jimmy, we can't start over, because everything that's happened here tonight has shown me exactly who you are, and what this show is really about, and I don't want any part of it. The finality in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just the end of an interview, it was the end of any pretense that late-night television was about anything other than ratings and manufactured drama. Channing walked around to the front of his chair and looked directly into the main camera. To everyone watching at home, I want you to know that the film we were supposed to discuss tonight is called Breaking Point, and it deals with addiction, recovery, and the power of human connection to overcome even the darkest circumstances. If you're interested in seeing it, please don't let what happened here tonight stop you from checking it out. The fact that he was promoting his film directly to the camera, completely bypassing Jimmy and the traditional structure of the show, was perhaps the most devastating thing he could have done. It was a clear statement that he no longer considered Jimmy worthy of being part of the conversation. Jimmy sat there looking absolutely defeated as Channing continued. I also want people to understand that what you witnessed here tonight is what happens when entertainment becomes more important than humanity, when ratings become more important than respect, and when hosts forget that their guests are human, beings with feelings, not just content to be exploited for clicks and views. Channing removed his microphone and placed it carefully on Jimmy's desk. The simple action somehow carried more weight than anything else that had happened during the entire confrontation. It was a gesture of complete dismissal, a final statement that this conversation was over. Thank you to the audience for being here tonight, Channing said, looking out at the silent crowd. I'm sorry you had to witness this, but I hope it was educational. I hope it showed you what happens when someone finally decides to stand up to the people who think they can use and manipulate others for their own entertainment. With that, Channing turned and walked toward the exit, his stride confident and purposeful, despite everything that had just happened. The studio remained in complete silence as he disappeared backstage, leaving Jimmy sitting alone at his desk, looking like a man who had just watched his entire career implode on live television. The cameras continued to roll for several more seconds, capturing Jimmy's shell-shocked expression and the stunned faces of the audience members. Finally, someone off-camera must have made the call to cut to commercial, because the red lights on the cameras went dark, and the spell was broken. What had started as a routine late-night talk show interview had become one of the most explosive and unforgettable moments in television history. Channing Tatum had not only stood up for himself with incredible dignity and intelligence, but he had also exposed the ugly reality behind the entertainment industry's obsession with manufactured drama and fake controversy. This was a moment that would be talked about, analyzed, and remembered for years to come. It was the night that someone finally said, "Enough is enough," and did it in front of millions of people with such grace and power that it changed the conversation about celebrity interviews forever. So what do you think really pushed Channing over the edge? Was it Jimmy's admission about the network's expectations, or was there something deeper going on? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. Because when moments like these happen, you know we're going to break them down and give you all the details that everyone else missed.